The heat lay over Jackson like a heavy quilt that July night, a damp, humming weight that made even the street lamps sweat. Shortly after 11, David and Emily Whitaker eased their front door shut so gently the latch barely clicked, the soft nightlight in the hall casting a pale band across tile and toys. In the back bedrooms, two girls slept in summer sheets, the slower rhythm of their breathing blending with the air conditioner's patient drone. The hum of a 2008 silver Chevrolet Malibu rolled into the quiet, headlights sliding across the curb as the car backed out and took the lazy bend toward I-55. Inside, David wore the face of a man who'd worked all week and kept his worries to himself. Emily's thumbs moved over her phone as if the little screen could keep the world orderly and close. At 11:15 p.m., the Malibu joined the near-empty highway, tires whispering over the hot blacktop. Lightning pulsed over the tree line to the east, a filament-thin warning of a storm easing closer, and wind pushed up from the reservoir, heavy with the smell of rain and cut grass. A lone 18-wheeler lumbered past in the opposite lane, a floating island of amber marker lights in the dark. Somewhere near a service road turnout, the driver of that truck later remembered the odd vignette, a silver sedan on the shoulder with its hood popped and a honey-yellow dome light burning. He thought he saw two silhouettes in the glow, as insubstantial as shadows, and then his rig carried him on, the moment disappearing in mirrors. At 11:30 p.m., fluorescent tubes buzzed in a small gas station off I-55. A convex security mirror caught David at the counter holding a canned coffee, his eyes tired but steady. Emily stood beside him in a pale top, the light turning her hair a shade lighter. She glanced from her phone to the glass door twice, a quick, almost reflexive check of outside. The footage was only 90 seconds, the kind of nothing scene that fills the world until it's the last proof of life. The automatic door exhaled. The couple stepped out. The Malibu's headlights winked on. The screen went back to empty aisles and humming coolers. 17 minutes later, at 11:47 p.m., both of their phones went dark together, the last cellular breath pinging a tower above the western shore of the Ross Barnett Reservoir. Not a slow fade, not one device lingering in the network's lattice, but twin green dots that blinked out as one. That kind of synchronized silence would matter later. That night, it was just a gap, a piece of time no one could stand inside, something you could measure but not touch. The storm pushed in across the water, and the reservoir's surface took the first fat drops. Morning arrived with that particular cottony quiet you get after a late-night squall. In the Whitaker kitchen, the ordinary markers of family life sat where they'd been left. A sippy cup near the sink, a grocery list magneted to the fridge, a fold of toddler pajamas draped across a chair. Two small girls padded in on bare feet, hair askew, expecting a mother's voice and the love language of clattering mugs. The house answered with air conditioning and clock ticks. Their grandmother, who lived 3 streets over, let herself in just before 8 because habit and a small knot in her chest told her to. She called out once and then again. The master bed was made with the precision of 2 people who'd never returned to unmake it. The garage yawned empty, the Malibu's rectangle of clean concrete a blank space you could fall through. She tried David's number, then Emily's. Call failed. She swallowed and tried again and then stopped because the sound of recorded prompts felt cruel. At 8:02 a.m., her voice found the Hinds County Sheriff's dispatcher and held steady enough to get the words out. Son, daughter-in-law, gone. 2 children at home, car missing. The call moved like electricity through a system trained to wake up sharply in the first hours. Detectives who carry the phrase golden window like doctrine know that a missing person report in the morning, when a car and 2 adults left after 11, demands speed and structure, not superstition. Sheriff Randall Hayes, 20 years of knowing that certainty is a rare commodity, made the first decisions himself. One unit rolled north up I-55 to pull traffic feeds and check shoulder pull-offs for debris or skid scuffs. Another headed to the western marinas and gravel turnouts along the reservoir. A third started with the neighborhood, doorbells and kitchen tables, where the truths of marriages and debts and plans can betray themselves in 10-minute interviews. A tech specialist with a ponytail and a frayed polo shirt began the dull, exacting work of subpoenas. Tower logs, Credit card records, bank histories, the lattice of modern life that can place you more precisely than a map ever could. By late morning, the grandmother sat in a small interview room with a styrofoam cup and hands that wouldn't stop worrying the seam. She said what everyone else would repeat across the day. David loves those girls like breath. Emily is the kind of mother who will drive back from the store if she thinks she forgot the bedtime storybook. There are no packed suitcases, no whispered plans, no fights that tore wallpaper off the walls. She said vacation and Biloxi in church on Sunday. In a different voice, she said debts, and then shook her head because rumors move faster than police cars. At noon, the first concrete thing arrived. The gas station video with its tired coffee and quick finger taps and that look, Emily's eyes briefly cutting to the dark outside, not long enough to signal fear, long enough that when you watch it knowing everything else, it feels like a flare. Detectives fanned out across other cameras in the corridor, the on-ramp, a convenience store 2 exits up, a warehouse gate, but nothing else caught the Malibu as it moved north. The act of vanishing, done right, looks like a bad edit. Down by the reservoir, deputies in earth-brown uniforms put yellow tape where gravel meets water and talked to men who fish before lunch to beat heat and thunderstorms. Did you hear anything last night? A crash? An engine rev? Any headlights cutting across the launch after midnight? Heads shook. The storm had crowded the night with wind and quick rain. If a car had gone in, the lake, which was really a quilt of coves and fingers, gave no hint at the edges. The water's face was plain, impassive, an accomplice that never boasts. By 3, the K9 handler rubbed the dog's ears and said softly, "No track, because rain makes memory bleed out of dust and grass." A state helicopter punched grids in the sky, banking over the spillway and the west inlets, the camera operator calling out any bright returns that might be metal. The feed drew blank squares. The sonar the water unit had was the kind that makes useful pictures in good conditions and polite messes in bad. It threw back distractions, stumps, old pilings, cold shapes that turned out to be nothing at all. On the cul-de-sac where the Whitaker house sat, a few neighbors paced and a few retreated inside because helplessness is contagious. By dinner time, a small lectern faced a handful of cameras in a bland, multi-purpose room at the sheriff's office. Hayes stepped up with the posture of a man who refuses to speculate on television. He said the words a community wants and hates. We are pursuing all possibilities. There is no credible evidence of voluntary departure. There is no physical evidence of an accident. We are not ruling out foul play. He did not say what he was thinking, that 2 phones dying together in the same square of air meant coercion or water or both. In the evening, the storm lines trailed away. The heat took back the city. The Whitaker girls asked their grandmother where Mommy and Daddy were, and she told them that grown-ups were looking in all the places cars can hide. In living rooms and diners, people drew their own maps, the kind you share in whispers. A fight, a debt, a man they used to see at the corner bar, or else they leaned hard on the wish that it was all a single ugly accident, because the alternative, that a couple could be erased between a gas station counter and a half-lit shoreline, felt like a fact that would live rent-free in everyone's chest. What the file would someday show was already quietly closing around the day's reports, the fixed times of video, and the pinned location of the last phone ping. The gap that began at 11:30 and ended at 11:47. The simple math of miles and minutes that suggested the Whitakers had not just driven, but stopped. The first hours ended as they began, humid, buzzing, and uncommitted to answers. Somewhere on that western shore, a secret had been made, and the night was content to keep it. The case number stamped on the day's paperwork would age badly. Before it did, the words golden window closed with a soft thud, and the work stretched into the kind that lives in binders. Day 2 of the search began with the low roar of helicopters slicing the Mississippi heat, their shadows gliding across the rippling expanse of the Ross Barnett Reservoir. Yellow police tape fluttered in morning wind, staking claim to a shoreline that had become both the center of hope and a theater of despair. Deputies in brown uniforms shifted under the sun, eyes squinting against glare as sonar equipment was lowered into murky water. The reservoir itself, 12 square miles of inlets, coves, and thick mud, lay still, almost mocking the urgency of those who circled its edges. From above, it looked infinite, and for Sheriff Randall Hayes, every ripple felt like a secret he hadn't yet pried loose. Inside the sheriff's office, a conference room wall was now a mosaic of maps and timelines. Red string-linked points on I-55, from the Whitaker driveway to the gas station stop, then out to the final ping on the western shore. Beside it, mug-sized photographs of David and Emily were pinned at eye level, making sure no detective in that room forgot the human story beneath the grid lines. Hayes tapped a knuckle against the 17-minute gap scrawled in marker across the board. "That's the void," he said quietly. "Whatever happened, it happened here." Investigators worked in circles. One circle fanned into the Whitakers' neighborhood, knocking on doors in the stifling July heat. Neighbors described the couple in the same way: kind, faithful, anchored to their 2 daughters and to their small routines. They weren't the kind to skip out, one man insisted, shaking his head hard enough to make the sweat bead at his temple. No suitcases had been packed, no bank withdrawals had been made, no whispered goodbyes slipped to friends. For detectives, the testimony was clear: voluntary disappearance didn't fit. A second circle probed the couple's workplaces. David's colleagues at a construction firm remembered him as a perfectionist, a man who measured twice and cut once, slow to anger but firm in his standards. Just weeks earlier, he had been promised a new project contract, the kind that could ease a family's finances. Emily's co-workers at the elementary school spoke of her gentle patience, her habit of buying snacks out of her own pocket for children who forgot lunch money. Neither gave off the scent of desperation, no hint of someone preparing to abandon their lives. Meanwhile, the tech unit dissected the Whitakers' digital lives. The final phone records painted a stark image. At 11:20, David's device pinged a tower as the Malibu moved north on I-55. At 11:47, Emily's phone chirped its last at the western reservoir before silence swallowed both signals. No more calls, no background data, no electronic echo. It was as if the night itself had pressed a finger to their mouths. The financial review came back just as stark. Bank accounts showed paychecks still sitting untouched, balances static. Credit cards showed no activity after July 14th. Their mortgage was current, and beyond that, their debts were modest, far less than the neighborhood whispers suggested. One investigator scribbled across his notes: "Fleeing theory unlikely. No financial prep." By noon of the second day, the grandmother, worn from sleepless hours of caring for the girls, sat at the sheriff's station once again. Her voice, steady but breaking at the edges, cut through speculation. David would never leave his children. Emily never even spent a night away. You can write whatever you want, but write that down. The statement was logged in bold letters: "Family rejects abandonment theory." As hours passed, helicopters swept wider circles. Rubber boats probed coves with outdated sonar that returned more questions than answers. Divers plunged into black water with headlamps slicing short-lived tunnels of light. They surfaced with reports of logs, debris, or nothing at all. One came up shaking his head, water streaming off his mask, saying, "It's like the lake just swallowed them whole." Reporters clustered near the shore, microphones angled like weapons. How does a car vanish without a trace? One local anchor asked live on camera. Residents echoed the same disbelief. Coffee shops filled with speculation. Some whispered of debts David owed, others muttered about a stranger at the gas station, while a smaller, cruel rumor suggested the couple had chosen to run. But to those who knew the Whitakers, that last story was an insult. That evening, Sheriff Hayes faced cameras again. His tie hung loose in the humid air, his face marked with exhaustion, but also a grim determination. "We are pursuing all leads," he told reporters. "We cannot confirm accident, voluntary disappearance, or foul play at this time. All remain possibilities." Behind the neutrality of his words, though, was the weight of a growing certainty. 2 phones going dark together was not accident's work. Back at the family home, the Whitakers' daughters played quietly on the living room floor, unaware of the storm swirling beyond their walls. Their grandmother sat nearby, clutching the cordless phone, as if an answer might arrive through the receiver at any moment. A stuffed bear lay discarded on the couch, the kind Emily would tuck under her daughter's arms each night. The normalcy of toys and children's laughter only deepened the strangeness of absence. By the end of the second day, the case was no longer just a missing person report. It was becoming a mystery that gnawed at Jackson itself. A young couple had disappeared, not in some wilderness, not in foreign territory, but within a 20-minute drive of their own front door. For the sheriff's team, the case notes grew heavy with data but light on answers. Each pin on the map was a dead end. Each hour that passed without a clue widened the canyon between fact and theory. And so the story of David and Emily Whitaker entered its third day, not with clarity, but with shadows. The storm had long since moved on, the streets of Jackson drying under the July sun. But in the Whitaker file, the storm only deepened. A silver Malibu, a 17-minute gap, and 2 lives erased into silence. Somewhere, someone knew more than the lake was willing to give. The morning of July 17, 2012, broke with a restless urgency. The Whitaker disappearance was no longer just a local curiosity. It had become a crisis stretching across Mississippi's headlines. Helicopters churned overhead, their blades echoing over neighborhoods where porch conversations were reduced to whispers. At the Ross Barnett Reservoir, the shoreline transformed into a makeshift command post. Deputies in uniform strung fresh yellow tape, staking out ground that looked, to the untrained eye, no different from any other lakeside morning. But to Sheriff Hayes and his team, this was now the epicenter of a vanishing that defied reason. On the water, rubber boats drifted slowly across grid lines marked on laminated maps. The outdated sonar equipment police relied upon displayed hazy shapes that might be tree trunks, sunken boats, or simply the muddy tricks of the reservoir itself. Divers prepared for another descent into black water, faces taut as they adjusted oxygen tanks. Each carried a quiet dread, not only of what they might find, but of surfacing again with empty hands. By mid-morning, the search expanded. Dirt roads feeding into the lake were combed, deputies stooping to examine the ground for brake marks or tire imprints. But heavy rain from the storm on July 14th had washed the earth clean. It was as if the night itself had taken part in covering tracks. One deputy muttered under his breath, like the lake wanted to keep its secret. Local fishermen were pulled aside for questioning, their weathered faces creased from years on the water. Most shook their heads, recalling only thunderclaps and the howl of wind the night David and Emily vanished. Didn't see no lights, no splash, nothing but the storm, one insisted. Another offered, if a car went down that night, the rain and lightning would have hidden it. None could provide the moment of clarity investigators longed for. 3 consecutive days stretched into a grueling rhythm. Helicopters hovered, sonar swept, divers plunged. Each hour ended in futility. Instead of answers, searchers found the forgotten relics of a reservoir's history. Rusting boats, sodden branches, concrete blocks. None bore the shape of a Chevrolet Malibu. Each negative result tightened the knot in Hayes' chest. Meanwhile, Jackson's media pulsed with speculation. WLBT ran nightly segments with dramatic aerial shots of the reservoir, describing it as a watery graveyard of unanswered questions. One anchor signed off a broadcast with the haunting words, "How can 2 people in a car simply vanish into the Mississippi night?" At the reservoir's edge, the Whitaker family gathered day after day. The grandmother stood with her granddaughters clinging to her skirt, eyes fixed on the rippling water. Every time divers resurfaced, she lifted her head in desperate hope, only to see them shake their heads. A small group of neighbors came, too, some clasping hands in prayer circles, others bringing food and water for the family, as if those gestures could blunt the edge of despair. By the end of the week, the fragile optimism that buoyed the first days sagged under the weight of futility. Sheriff Hayes faced reporters once more, the lines under his eyes deeper, his voice slower. "We've deployed every resource available," he said, but the words sounded like a resignation. He didn't say what everyone was thinking, that resources were running thin, and attention, fickle as ever, would soon shift. And shift it did. By late July, news cycles pivoted to a warehouse fire and the looming election. The Whitaker story slipped from page 1 to page 3, then sometimes vanished entirely. Missing posters curled under the sun, taped to street lamps and church boards, their edges browned and brittle. Inside the sheriff's office, the file grew heavy with paperwork, but light with hope. Theories multiplied in margins: possible car submersion, potential foul play, voluntary disappearance unlikely. Yet no evidence materialized to convert ink into truth. Hayes stared at those words late at night, the smell of stale coffee thick in the room. No bodies, no car, no crime scene, he scrawled grimly across a page. For the family, the days stretched into weeks of unending silence. Each evening, the daughters asked their grandmother when their parents were coming home. Each night, she held them tighter, unable to answer. In church pews, whispers about the Whitakers grew quieter, replaced by talk of school tuition and rising gas prices. The reservoir itself fell still, its surface smooth as glass, betraying nothing of what it might conceal beneath. By the second month, the search was scaled back. Helicopters no longer circled daily. Sonar equipment was packed away. Only occasional dives took place when tips trickled in, none fruitful. On paper, the file was stamped pending investigation. In reality, it was drifting toward the cold basement where unsolved cases slept. Jackson residents learned to carry the unease like background noise, an unresolved hum beneath the normal clatter of life. Some still whispered theories, a robbery gone wrong, a runaway plan, a hidden double life. But more often than not, conversations stopped mid-sentence, as though speaking of the Whitakers risked calling their ghosts into the room. And so in the summer of 2012, the case of David and Emily Whitaker stalled. Like a film cut mid-reel, their story hung unfinished, a silver Malibu gone, two parents erased, and a city left staring at the water, wondering what lay beneath. By the fall of 2012, the Whitaker case had shifted from a frantic manhunt to a silent ache, its absence of progress louder than any official statement. In Jackson's neighborhoods, the missing couple's names began to fade from daily chatter. Only in the Whitaker household did their presence remain constant, haunting every hallway, every mealtime, every sleepless night. The sheriff's office had no choice but to file the case under open but inactive. Reports from those first feverish weeks lay sealed in thick folders, gathering dust in the records room. To Sheriff Randall Hayes, it was a personal failure. He had promised the family answers, promised the community a resolution. Now, staring at his own reflection in the office window, he saw only a weary man outpaced by shadows. For the family, grief didn't come with the clarity of death. It came with the paralysis of uncertainty. David and Emily's daughters, Anna and Grace, carried that uncertainty into every corner of their young lives. At night, they lay in twin beds, listening for footsteps that never returned. Their grandmother Maria tucked them in, forcing a trembling smile. Yet each time the girls asked, "When are Mom and Dad coming back?" her silence deepened the wound. In 2013, after exhausting all active leads, the case was officially labeled a cold case. The word carried a sting sharper than grief. Cold meant stillness. Cold meant forgotten. At the Hinds County Sheriff's Office, the Whitaker file was boxed, sealed, and slid onto a shelf among hundreds of others, each a story left unfinished. Down in that basement, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, the case existed only as paper and ink. For the Whitaker family, however, it was a living absence, a ghost that walked beside them every day. Yet the memory refused to vanish entirely from the community. Each July 14th, on the anniversary of the disappearance, friends, neighbors, and relatives gathered at the small church David and Emily once attended. A photo of the couple, smiling on their wedding day, was placed near the altar, surrounded by candles. Hymns rose softly in the air, punctuated by the sniffles of children grown old enough to understand what loss meant. Anna and Grace sat quietly, heads bowed, tears brimming as they clutched their grandmother's hands. Over the years, the memorial became a ritual, a promise to keep the Whitakers' memory alive, a refusal to let the case dissolve into silence. For Anna and Grace, growing up meant carrying invisible scars. Anna, the eldest, avoided classroom assignments that asked her to write about family. She couldn't bear to explain that hers was fractured. Grace, quieter, often hid handmade cards on Mother's Day and Father's Day, too pained to complete them. At school, when friends talked about vacations, birthdays, and family dinners, the sisters sat in silence, eyes down, swallowing the weight of what they lacked. By their teenage years, whispers followed them. Those are the Whitaker girls, the ones whose parents vanished. Pity mingled with curiosity in their peers' eyes, branding them with a story they never chose. Meanwhile, Jackson carried the case as an open wound in the collective memory. Crime shows occasionally revisited it. replaying grainy helicopter footage of the reservoir, overlaying David and Emily's faces with ominous narration. Each time, the Whitaker family was thrust back into anguish, their lives reopened for the public like a scar picked raw. Inside the sheriff's office, rookies were sometimes assigned to review the file as a training exercise. They flipped through witness statements, scrutinized the gas station footage, studied the cell tower pings, but in the end, each closed the folder with the same hollow conclusion. No car, no bodies, no crime scene. It was a textbook example of a case swallowed by circumstance. Despite it all, Maria refused to let her son and daughter-in-law vanish in silence. She became the family's anchor, attending church every week, lighting candles, whispering prayers for answers. Her hands, lined with age, held steady the fragile hope that justice would one day surface. 9 years passed this way. Jackson changed. New buildings rose, neighborhoods shifted, storms came and went. But for the Whitaker family, time moved differently. They lived in the pause between July 14, 2012, and whatever day the truth might come to light. In the summer of 2021, nearly a decade after the disappearance, the church held its largest memorial yet. Dozens of residents gathered in a circle outside, holding candles that flickered against the humid night. Anna, now a college freshman, stood before them, her voice trembling but resolute. "We will never give up," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "My parents deserve answers. We will keep searching." Her vow was both a plea and a command, a declaration that the case would not remain cold forever. For the first time in years, hope stirred not only in her family's hearts but in the community's as well. And then in early 2022, that hope took tangible form. A phone call from a civilian diving team in Louisiana offered a chance to reopen the case. They had technology police never used in 2012, sonar so precise it could reveal the outline of a tire hidden beneath years of silt. They wanted to search the Ross Barnett Reservoir again. When Maria heard the news, she wept. Not because she expected a miracle, but because for the first time in a decade, someone was willing to look again. February 2022 marked the first real movement in the Whitaker case in nearly a decade. What had once been a file buried in the basement of the sheriff's office was suddenly thrust back into daylight, carried by the hands of people outside law enforcement. The Delta Recovery Unit, known as DRU, was a small nonprofit built on persistence and technology. Its members were former military divers, volunteer sonar experts, and men and women who believed that no case was too old to revisit. Travis Miller, the founder, was a Navy veteran hardened by years of underwater recoveries. Gray streaks cut through his dark hair, his voice slow and deliberate. To him, searching lakes and rivers for missing vehicles wasn't just technical, it was moral. "Every car underwater is a story waiting to be told," he often said. Alongside him was Cole Johnson, younger but no less experienced. Cole had worked offshore oil rigs as a sonar technician, his eyes trained to read sonar screens as fluently as others read text. When he stared at the black and white images of lake beds, he didn't see smudges or shapes. He saw secrets. The two men arrived in Jackson with their aluminum boat, its hull scuffed from dozens of missions. Bolted to its frame were two sonar systems, the Humminbird Helix 12 and Garmin LiveScope, both capable of scanning in razor-sharp detail. At their first meeting with the sheriff's office, Travis spread a large laminated map of the Ross Barnett Reservoir across the table. Sheriff Hayes sat opposite, older now, his face etched with lines of wear. His hand hovered over the western shoreline, the spot where cell tower data had last placed Emily's phone before it went silent. "We believe the Malibu is still here," Travis said, his finger tapping the map. Cole added, "The technology you had in 2012 couldn't see past heavy mud. With our gear, if it's here, we'll find it. We can detect the outline of a rim under 15 feet of silt." For a long moment, Hayes said nothing. He had watched this case devour resources and hope for years. But the determination in the diver's eyes stirred something he thought he'd lost. "All right," he said finally, voice steady. "If you can help, we'll reopen the file." News spread quickly. "Civilian dive team to reinvestigate 2012 Whitaker disappearance," one local paper headlined. Cameras gathered at the reservoir's edge as Travis and Cole launched their boat, explaining their plan. They would divide the reservoir into a grid, moving the boat at a crawl, 2 miles per hour, scanning every strip of water with overlapping passes. Nothing would be left unchecked. Skepticism bubbled alongside hope. Some Jackson residents muttered that too much time had passed, that the reservoir had already been combed. Others clung to the possibility of answers. At the Whitaker memorial service that year, Anna and Grace wept openly as Travis declared before the crowd, 10 years is too long, but it's never too late. We will not give up. Behind the scenes, another force joined the effort. Rachel Moore, a young investigator newly assigned to the cold case unit, began combing through the original 2012 files. Where others had seen exhausted leads, she saw missed opportunities. She spread the timeline across her desk. 11:30 p.m., David and Emily appear on gas station footage. 11:47 p.m., Emily's phone pings its last signal near the reservoir's western shore. 17 minutes accounted for by a short drive, but too long for the distance covered. Rachel calculated the average speed, compared maps from 2012 with updated ones, and noticed abandoned side roads near the lake, now closed after storms. In 2012, they had been open. They didn't just vanish, she whispered, scribbling notes in red ink. Something happened in that gap. The detail gnawed at her. The truck driver who reported seeing a car pulled over hood up around that time. His statement had been dismissed as vague. But paired with the time gap in the phone data, it painted a chilling picture. The Whitakers may have stopped, not by choice. Rachel compiled her findings into a new visual map. Red ink traced the route from the gas station to the reservoir, circling the western shore where signals died. She marked the 30-minute void with bold strokes. It was the area DR needed to prioritize. At the coordination meeting, Rachel laid out her map. Her voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency. This is where they disappeared. If the Malibu is here, it's in this zone. Travis studied the map, then nodded. Cole leaned forward, eyes bright. Our sonar won't miss it. If there's a car down there, we'll see it. For Hayes, who had lived with the weight of this case for a decade, Rachel's conviction in DRU's technology sparked something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, cautious belief. Then we start here, he said, tapping the map, the western shore, where the trail went cold. That night, as mist drifted over the reservoir, the boat's motor hummed softly, carrying Travis, Cole, and Rachel over dark water. The sonar screens glowed pale green in the shadows. Every ripple seemed to whisper with secrets. For the first time in 10 years, the investigation felt alive again, as if the reservoir itself knew its silence was about to be broken. The morning air was heavy with fog as the Delta Recovery Unit's aluminum boat slid quietly onto the western shore of the Ross Barnett Reservoir. The reservoir stretched out like a steel-gray mirror, still and deceptive, hiding what might lie beneath. Travis Miller stood at the bow, his expression stoic, but his posture taut, as if bracing himself for the weight of what they were about to uncover. Cole Johnson hunched over the sonar equipment, fingers gliding across buttons with the precision of a surgeon. Rachel Moore clutched her notebook and the marked map, her eyes fixed on the water as if sheer willpower could force the truth to rise. The boat moved slowly, 2 miles per hour, just as Travis had insisted. The sonar beams cut deep into the reservoir's mud, transmitting their ghostly images onto the monitor. To the untrained eye, the streaks and shadows looked abstract, like smudges of charcoal. To Cole, they spoke volumes. Rock formation, he murmured, pointing at a jagged outline. That's a sunken log. That, he paused, circling a faint image, is debris from old construction. Rachel leaned closer, straining to see what he saw. How do you know? She asked. Edges, Cole explained. Nature doesn't make straight edges. You see symmetry, curves like this. He tapped the screen. That's man-made. That's when I pay attention. An hour passed, then another. The boat glided across the water in long, deliberate passes. Travis kept glancing between the horizon and the screen, scanning not only for shapes below, but for the rising tension in his team. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the engine's hum and the faint lap of water against the hull. Then Cole froze. His hand hovered above the controls, eyes narrowing at the monitor. Travis, he said, his voice low but urgent. Travis stepped over, staring at the screen. Rachel leaned in, heart pounding. The sonar displayed a distinct outline, 15 feet long, 6 feet wide, half buried at a tilted angle in the mud. That's no log. Travis said, voice tight. The outline was unmistakable. A roofline, 4 faint wheel arches, the symmetry of a sedan under years of silt. Rachel gripped her notebook so hard her knuckles whitened. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the Malibu." Cole adjusted the sonar, scanning from multiple angles. Each pass sharpened the image. Curved roof, shadowed frame, wheels sunk deep. He marked the coordinates and dropped an orange buoy above the spot. The buoy bobbed gently, a small, almost mocking marker of what had waited 10 years beneath. Travis turned to Rachel. "We don't touch it yet. We call it in. The police have to see this themselves, or it's worthless in court." Rachel nodded, her throat tight. She dialed Hayes' number with trembling fingers. "Sheriff," she said when he answered, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We found something. You need to come now." Within 40 minutes, patrol cars lined the reservoir's edge. Officers stretched yellow crime scene tape across the shoreline. Locals, drawn by the sight of flashing lights, clustered at a distance, whispering. Sheriff Hayes stepped onto the bank, his weathered face pale as he gazed at the buoy bobbing over the water. "Show me," he ordered. On the sonar screen, Cole replayed the footage. The sheriff stared at the ghostly outline, his jaw tightening. For years he had faced cameras and admitted they had no answers. Now, staring at the car-shaped shadow, he whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe after all this time, we found them." Divers suited up as the crowd grew restless. A mobile crane was dispatched, its groaning engine echoing across the lake. Rachel stood by the buoy, notebook pressed against her chest, her heart hammering. For a decade, the Whitaker story had been told in speculation, rumors, and silence. Now at last, the reservoir was about to speak. When the divers slipped beneath the surface, the ripples spread wide, as if the water itself knew that its secret was no longer safe. Above, silence fell over the shore, every eye fixed on the buoy, every breath caught in waiting. Whatever came out of that water would not only change the Whitaker family's story, it would redefine 10 years of mystery, grief, and unanswered questions. The divers slipped into the murky depths, their black wetsuits vanishing beneath the surface as the safety line uncoiled after them. On shore, every sound seemed amplified, the clicking of cameras, the crackle of police radios, the low murmur of the gathered crowd. Yet all focus was on the water, on the ripples circling the orange buoy that marked the grave a decade-long secret. Underwater, visibility was nearly non-existent. Mud, algae, and sediment clouded every inch, turning flashlight beams into faint yellow cones swallowed by brown haze. Travis Miller's gloved hand felt along the guide rope, his heartbeat thundering in his ears beneath the regulator's hiss. Beside him, Cole Johnson followed, eyes straining to catch outlines through the soup of darkness. Then Travis's hand brushed against something hard. He froze, then reached forward. Smooth curves beneath his fingertips. Metal. He scraped away mud with his glove, revealing a familiar shape, an oval indentation, letters faint under algae. He trained his flashlight, and there it was, the Chevrolet emblem. He looked at Cole, eyes wide behind his mask. Cole filmed quickly with the waterproof camera, capturing every detail. Together they traced the body, confirming the symmetry of a sedan, hood, roof, trunk. Then Travis lowered himself toward the rear bumper, brushing more mud until his hand found the raised edges of numbers. The flashlight beam caught them. MS4HT92, the license plate, the Malibu's license plate. They had found David and Emily Whitaker's car. 3 sharp tugs on the safety rope signaled success. On the surface, the line vibrated, and Rachel Moore nearly cried out. "They've got it," she whispered. Sheriff Hayes' eyes filled with something he hadn't felt in years, relief mixed with dread. Minutes later, the divers surfaced, masks dripping, pulling the regulator from their mouths. "It's the Malibu," Travis said hoarsely. "Plate matches. No mistake." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped, some wept. Rachel covered her mouth, her eyes stinging. Sheriff Hayes closed his eyes briefly, whispering, "We found them." The crane roared to life, steel cables lowered and secured by the divers to the car's frame. Slowly, painfully, the mud yielded its hold. Bubbles rose as the car broke free, inch by inch from its watery tomb. The water churned, thick plumes of silt rising to the surface. Then at last the hood breached. The silver paint, dulled by a decade underwater, dripped with foul water and strands of algae. As more of the car rose, shattered windows poured out sludge, and the stench of rust and decay spread across the shore. The crowd gasped as the full body emerged, dripping and grotesque. To outsiders, it was just a wreck. To the Whitaker family, standing a distance away under police escort, it was their parents' coffin resurfacing after 10 years. Police moved quickly, unfurling tarps to shield the vehicle from public view. Forensic officers in white suits moved in, cameras rolling, every detail documented. Sheriff Hayes' voice cut sharp through the heavy silence. From here on, this is a crime scene. No one touches anything without clearance. The car was lowered onto a flatbed trailer. As the first door was pried open, a hush swept over everyone. Inside, dim light revealed what all had feared but expected. 2 skeletal forms still strapped in their seats, seatbelts fastened tight. Mud-caked bones slumped against decayed upholstery. On the passenger side, a faint glint, a wedding ring clinging to a bony finger. Rachel's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. "David and Emily," she whispered. The officers stood frozen for a moment, reverence mixing with shock. Then, methodically, the forensic team moved in, bagging evidence, photographing the scene. A battered cell phone, a wallet, waterlogged and empty, dark stains on the door. Every item was tagged, sealed, preserved. From a distance, Anna and Grace, now young women, clung to their grandmother. Their sobs carried faintly across the water, breaking even the most hardened officer's composure. For 10 years they had lived with absence. Now, before their eyes, that absence was given shape. Grief solidified into bone and metal. Sheriff Hayes, his voice raw, turned to the family. "We'll get answers. I promise you, this isn't the end. This is the beginning." The flatbed rolled away, carrying the Malibu under tarps toward the forensic lab. Sirens wailed, clearing a path through Jackson's streets. Behind, the reservoir grew still again, as if indifferent to the storm of grief and revelation it had unleashed. But no one present believed it was just an accident anymore. The intact seatbelts, the fractures glimpsed in the bones, and the strange blood stain on the driver's door, blood that didn't belong to David or Emily. The reservoir had given up its secret. Now the real investigation would begin. The Malibu sat under harsh white lights in Jackson's evidence storage facility, its mud-caked frame dripping onto the tarp-covered floor. Investigators moved in careful choreography, every step filmed, every bag sealed, every fingerprint lifted. The air was thick with mildew, rust, and a suffocating sense of anticipation. For the Whitaker case, this was the first tangible evidence in a decade, and no one dared compromise it. Dr. Linda Harper, Mississippi's veteran forensic pathologist, arrived early the next morning. 20 years of examining human remains had left her hardened, but even she felt the weight of the moment. Laying out her instruments with surgical precision, she nodded to her team. "We treat this as sacred," she said quietly. They waited 10 years to be found. The skeletal remains were removed with reverence. Side by side on stainless steel tables, they told a story without words. David's frame was identified by a rusted wristwatch engraved with his initials. Emily's by the tarnished gold band still clinging to her finger. DNA testing against their daughter's samples would later confirm their identities, but to anyone in that room, there was no doubt. The examination quickly revealed chilling details. David's skull bore a long, sharp fracture, extending from temple to nape, a blow delivered with brutal force. Emily's forehead was crushed inward, spiderweb cracks radiating from a single point of impact. Both had multiple broken ribs, the fractures surrounded by faint traces of hemorrhaging. The verdict was clear. They were alive when they were struck. These injuries didn't come from water pressure, Dr. Harper concluded, her voice firm. They were inflicted before the car entered the reservoir. Cause of death, traumatic brain injury, multiple blunt force impacts. This was homicide. Her words dropped like stones into the silence. Sheriff Hayes, standing behind the observation glass, closed his eyes. For years he had battled guilt, believing the investigation had failed because they missed the car. Now he knew they had been searching for victims of murder all along. While Dr. Harper's team cataloged every injury, forensic techs combed through the Malibu's interior. They found an old Nokia phone beneath the back seat, its casing cracked but SIM card intact. Even after 10 years underwater, data might still be recoverable. Near the gas pedal, a rotted leather wallet turned up, empty of cash, stripped of anything but scraps of paper and a corroded bank card. More ominous was a small stain on the driver's side door. Under UV light, it fluoresced faintly. Swabs were taken, rushed to the state DNA lab. Days later, the results stunned everyone. The blood didn't match David or Emily. Rachel Moore read the lab report twice, her heart racing. "We've got a third person," she whispered. "Someone else was in that car." The evidence didn't stop there. Pressed into the driver's side floor mat was a shoe print, larger than David's size, with a distinct herringbone sole pattern common to Red Wing work boots. Someone had sat in that seat, pressed the pedals, and driven the Malibu into the reservoir. Rachel pieced the evidence together late one night. Photos and reports spread across her desk. The empty wallet, the foreign blood, the oversized shoe print. This wasn't a couple disappearing, she wrote in her journal. Someone was with them. Someone attacked them. Someone staged this as an accident. When news of the forensic findings leaked, Jackson erupted. Headlines screamed, "Whitaker deaths ruled homicide." Churches held vigils. Locals, once resigned to mystery, lit candles by the reservoir's edge, demanding justice. For the Whitaker daughters, Anna and Grace, the revelations cut deep. "We prayed it was an accident," Anna whispered through tears. "At least then they didn't suffer. But this, someone hurt them. Someone did this on purpose." Grace held her sister tightly, her voice breaking. "At least we know the truth now. They didn't leave us. They were taken." For Sheriff Hayes and Rachel Moore, the case had crossed a threshold, no longer a missing persons file gathering dust. It was officially a double homicide. And whoever spilled blood inside that Malibu had walked free for 10 years. But not for much longer. The Whitaker file, once sealed and forgotten in the cold case archive, now lay open across the sheriff's office war room. Maps, photographs, DNA reports, and witness statements were pinned to boards, red string drawing connections across a timeline that had haunted Jackson for more than a decade. Sheriff Randall Hayes stood at the front, his voice heavy but resolute. "From this point on, we're not asking what happened. We're asking who killed them." Rachel Moore spearheaded the witness re-interviews, determined to revisit every overlooked detail from 2012. The first stop was the gas station manager, Janice Howard, whose testimony back then had been reduced to a single note. Saw them buy coffee, nothing unusual. Sitting across from Rachel in the fluorescent-lit store office, Janice shook her head with regret. "They didn't just buy coffee," she said firmly. "David stepped outside first. He argued with a man near the door, tall, broad shoulders, maybe brown hair. I remember him slamming his hand against the glass. Emily looked scared, like she wanted to leave fast." Rachel felt a chill. That detail had never made it into the original report. "Why didn't you push harder to tell the police back then?" she asked. "They didn't ask," Janice replied, eyes downcast. "They just wanted times and receipts. I thought if it mattered, they'd come back." Rachel wrote it all down. A confrontation. A man, a possible suspect, standing right there at the last confirmed sighting of David and Emily alive. The second witness was truck driver Harold Benson, whose claim in 2012 of seeing the Malibu on the roadside had been brushed aside as unreliable. Now retired, Benson's memory was sharp and clear. "That night around midnight, I saw a silver sedan pulled over, hood up, and a white pickup parked just behind it, lights off. A man was standing by, built strong, brown hair, light shirt. He wasn't helping them. He was just standing there, like waiting." Rachel's pen stopped. Two witnesses describing the same type of man, the same night, one at the gas station, one at the roadside, and both accounts ignored in the rush of the original investigation. Back in the office, Rachel dug through the old case file. Among the pages, a name reappeared, Mark Ellison. Ellison had once been close to David, a high school friend turned occasional business partner in construction projects. But records showed the friendship soured. In 2010, they'd quarreled over money. One of David's brothers had recalled him saying, "I'm done with Mark. Don't trust him." Yet the note sat buried in the file, overshadowed by theories of accident or voluntary disappearance. Rachel pulled Ellison's background, a failing garage owner in Laurel, multiple lawsuits, mounting debts, and crucially in 2012, he drove a white Ford F-150 pickup. The pieces slid into place like a cruel puzzle. The witnesses' descriptions, the truck near the reservoir, the shoe print in the Malibu, the financial motive, and now the blood in the car, still waiting for comparison. She showed Ellison's photo to Janice and Harold separately. Both identified him instantly. "That's the man. Janice said, trembling. Harold was even firmer. I'll never forget that face. Sheriff Hayes listened in silence as Rachel presented the findings, then finally spoke. We have motive, opportunity, and witnesses. If that blood matches him, this case is done. As they spoke, the Whitaker daughters sat in their grandmother's kitchen, staring at the news breaking on local TV. Police refocused investigation on family acquaintance. Anna's voice trembled. He sat in our house. He ate with Dad. How could he? Grace cut her off, her fists clenched. Then he killed them and lived free all these years. Their grandmother wept silently, clutching her rosary. I let him through our door. God forgive me. In the sheriff's office, Rachel pinned Ellison's photo to the board. Beneath it, she wrote in red marker, primary suspect. But Hayes raised a hand. Not yet. Not until we have proof no jury can ignore. The proof, everyone knew, was in that blood stain. The lab in Jackson was silent except for the faint hum of sequencing machines. For weeks, technicians worked with meticulous care, extracting fragments of degraded DNA from the blood swabbed off the Malibu's driver's side door. The strain of time, water, and mud made the process painstaking. But modern technology had advanced far beyond what was available in 2012. Each base pair was a potential key to unlocking the truth. On a sweltering afternoon in June, the results came back. Rachel Moore stood in the forensic office, holding a sealed envelope. Sheriff Hayes was beside her, his weathered hands clasped tightly. With a deep breath, Rachel tore it open and scanned the report. Her eyes froze on one line, her voice breaking the silence. DNA from the blood sample matches Mark Ellison, probability 100%. For a moment, neither spoke. Hayes leaned back in his chair, exhaling a decade of weight. It's him, he said finally, his voice low but steady. We've got him. The room filled with a tense, reverent silence. The tiniest trace of blood, overlooked for 10 years, had finally spoken. Mark Ellison hadn't just known David and Emily. He had been inside their car, bleeding, the night they were murdered. Rachel immediately compiled the findings into a comprehensive case file. On the whiteboard, she wrote in bold red, motive, opportunity, direct evidence. Each piece clicked together. Ellison's debts, his white pickup, the witness sightings, the confrontation at the gas station, Emily's final text, the shoe print, and now the DNA. Still, Hayes urged caution. We can't rush this, he said. If we move too soon, he'll deny everything, claim contamination or coincidence. We need to box him in so tight he can't breathe. Surveillance teams were dispatched to monitor Ellison. From the outside, his life appeared ordinary, working odd jobs at a small garage, drinking at a bar most evenings. But beneath the surface, there were cracks. Investigators noted he'd recently sold off equipment, made vague calls about getting away, and confided to one drinking buddy that the police were sniffing too close. Meanwhile, Rachel prepared for a second interrogation. She meticulously assembled the evidence: photos of the Malibu, images of the shoe print, the lab's DNA confirmation, Emily's haunting final message. Someone is following us. She placed them in order, a story that would leave no room for denial. In the Whitaker household, Anna and Grace were informed of the breakthrough. Tears welled as Anna whispered, "So it was him all along." Grace's voice shook with rage. He watched us suffer for 10 years. He let us grow up without answers, and all this time he knew. Their grandmother clutched their hands tightly. Now God is showing us the truth, she said softly. The sheriff's office buzzed with a new energy, determination pulsing through every corridor. After years of silence, the case was alive, burning, urgent, unstoppable. Late one night, Rachel sat alone in the evidence room. She pulled back the tarp covering the Malibu, resting her hand on the rusted door where Ellison's blood had been found. In her mind, she saw David struggling, Emily terrified, the killer's hand pressing against the frame, leaving behind the single mistake that would one day betray him. "You left your mark," she whispered, "and now it will bury you." The next morning, Sheriff Hayes called his team together. "Tomorrow we bring him in again," he announced. "This time we don't let him walk out." For 10 long years, Mark Ellison's name had been little more than a line in an old file, but now his blood tied him irrevocably to a double homicide. The game was over. The second interrogation room was deliberately prepared to feel smaller than it was. Yellowed walls, the hum of an old air conditioner, and a steel table scarred with scratches. A camera blinked steadily from the corner, recording every movement. When Mark Ellison entered, escorted by 2 deputies, he still carried himself with the same swagger as before. Worn leather jacket, arms crossed, eyes shifting between Rachel Moore and her partner as though he were in control. But beneath his confidence was something brittle, a crack in his armor that only widened when he sat down. Rachel began calmly, her voice steady and deliberate. "Mr. Ellison, last time you told us you were home the night David and Emily disappeared, that you drank, watched TV, and went to bed." "Exactly," Ellison said, leaning back. "And I told you then, I've got nothing to hide." Rachel placed a document folder on the table, sliding out a photo. "Then explain this. Your phone pinged a tower near Ross Barnett Reservoir between 11:40 and 11:50 p.m. That's the exact window David and Emily vanished. You weren't at home. You were there." Ellison gave a dry laugh, waving a dismissive hand. "So what? Phones bounce off towers all the time. Doesn't prove a damn thing." Rachel didn't blink. She pulled another sheet from the folder. A grainy still of a white pickup driving toward the reservoir. "And what about this? A white Ford F-150. Same model, same year you owned. Same night, same road." Ellison's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he leaned forward, forcing a sneer. "There are thousands of white pickups in Mississippi. You going to put them all on trial?" Rachel remained silent for a long moment, letting the air thicken. Then she slid the final piece across the table, a close-up photo of the blood stain on the Malibu's driver's side door, followed by the sealed state forensic report. "The blood on that car door," she said, her voice sharp now, "matches yours, 100%. Ellison froze. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing as he stared at the photo. The silence dragged, punctuated only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Finally, he muttered, "That doesn't prove anything. I worked on cars all the time. Maybe I helped David once. Cut my hand." Rachel cut him off, her voice rising. "Don't lie. That blood wasn't on a wrench or a seat. It was smeared right where the driver's hand would grip the door. The same door David and Emily never opened again because they died in that car." For the first time, Ellison's mask slipped. His hands balled into fists on the table, veins bulging. Sweat formed on his brow. He looked away, staring at the wall as if trying to escape. Rachel leaned closer, her tone measured, deliberate. "You knew the hood was up, Mark. You mentioned it in your first interview. That detail was never released. Only someone at the scene would know it. You can claim coincidence all you want, but science doesn't lie, and neither does your slip." Ellison swallowed hard, his defiance wavering. He forced a laugh, weak and strained. "You've got nothing solid. One drop of blood, a blurry camera, some old memories. That's all you've got." But the room told a different story. His silence, his sweat, his slip of the tongue, they all betrayed him. Behind the one-way glass, Sheriff Hayes clenched his fist. "He's breaking," he whispered. "He knows the walls are closing in." After 2 grueling hours, Ellison crossed his arms, leaned back, and went stone silent. It was his last refuge, but it didn't matter. His blood was in that car. His phone was at the reservoir. Witnesses had seen him. And Emily's final message, "Someone is following us," echoed in the room like a ghost pointing directly at him. When the interrogation ended, Ellison was escorted out, his walk no longer arrogant but stiff, his jaw tight. Rachel closed the file and exhaled, her heart pounding. She knew what came next. With the DNA evidence, the witness testimony, and his own damning words, the case was strong enough to move forward. Later that night, in the quiet of her office, Rachel stared at the board where Emily's final message was penned in red ink. "Someone is following us. You gave us the truth, Emily," she whispered. "Now we'll make sure he never hurts anyone again." The report was typed, bound, and delivered to the Hinds County Prosecutor's Office by morning. 300 pages of evidence, timelines, witness statements, and forensic results. On the first page, in bold, Rachel had written, "Mark Ellison, prime suspect in the double homicide of David and Emily Whitaker." Prosecutor Harriet Collins, sharp-eyed and unflinching, spent hours combing through the file. She read every page, pausing at the lab report that confirmed Ellison's blood in the Malibu. She lingered on Emily's final text message, "Someone is following us," her jaw tightening as she imagined Emily's fear. When she finally closed the folder, she looked at Sheriff Hayes and Rachel Moore across her desk. "This is it," Collins said firmly. "We're moving forward. I'll request an arrest warrant for Mark Ellison on 2 counts of first-degree murder and staging a crime scene. In court that afternoon, she stood before the judge, laying out the evidence piece by piece: the DNA match, the shoe print, the surveillance footage of the white pickup, the suspicious cash deposit, the cell tower records, and Emily's final text. 1 drop of blood, she declared, holding up the lab report, waited 12 years to speak, and now it tells us exactly who took their lives. The courtroom was silent, the judge listening intently. After 2 hours of deliberation, his gavel struck with finality. Warrant granted. The state of Mississippi charges Mark Ellison with 2 counts of homicide. The order spread quickly through the sheriff's department. That night, Rachel and Hayes gathered their team in a dimly lit conference room. Maps of Ellison's known locations were pinned to the wall, his recent movements logged by surveillance. "He's restless," one deputy said. "He's been selling equipment, drinking more, even talking about leaving town. If we don't move soon, we could lose him." Hayes nodded, eyes steely. "Then we move at dawn." April 18th, 2024, Vicksburg, Mississippi. A quiet suburb stirred awake under flashing red and blue lights. 7 police cruisers sealed both ends of the street. A SWAT van rolled up silently, doors sliding open as men in black tactical gear filed out, rifles raised. Neighbors peeked through curtains, children pressed against windows as tension thickened like storm clouds. Inside a cluttered garage, Mark Ellison wiped grease from his hands, unaware of the storm about to break over him. He looked up only when the booming voice of a loudspeaker shattered the morning air. "Mark Ellison, this is the Hinds County Sheriff's Office. Step outside with your hands raised. You are under arrest for the murders of David and Emily Whitaker." Panic flickered across his face. He glanced toward the back door, but before he could move, a flashbang exploded outside, shaking the walls. The SWAT team stormed in, rifles trained. "Get down, now!" Ellison raised his hands, eyes wide, but still muttering, "This is a mistake. This is a mistake." He was shoved to the floor, cold handcuffs clamping around his wrists. The garage filled with the echo of his arrest, a sound that reverberated through 12 years of silence. Neighbors poured into the street, phones raised, recording as Ellison, once a familiar figure, a mechanic they trusted with their cars, was dragged into a waiting cruiser. Some gasped, some whispered, others simply stood frozen. Within hours, the images flooded social media. Mark Ellison, longtime suspect, finally in handcuffs. At Jackson headquarters, Rachel answered her ringing phone. A deputy's voice came through, heavy with emotion. "He's in custody. It's over." Rachel set the phone down slowly, glancing at the board filled with photos of David and Emily. For a moment, the weight of 12 years seemed to lift. She whispered to their images, "We got him. You're not forgotten." But she also knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a trial that would put every piece of their suffering on display.